Welcome, this is a new TV series called Racing Dirt to Road. In this series we're going to talk about a lot of exciting races, all out of New Zealand, racing all over the world, from motocross to enduro, off-road, extreme enduro, road racing. We're going to talk about their highs and lows, the exciting times and of course the down times. My name's Josh Coppins. I've got a rich history in racing, started riding motorcycles when I was 4 years old. Love the sport, been involved right since day one, and been a factory rider in Europe for 15 years, now based back in New Zealand as team manager for Altherm JCR Yamaha. The opportunity, it was critical that I had a result as well. Josh Coppins here, bringing you the final episode of Dirt to Road. Tonight we're bringing it to you from the Novotel at the International Auckland Airport. I myself are about to fly out to a race, the World Veteran Championships, where we have a host of Kiwis attending. I believe there's over 20 Kiwis heading out there to race, and quite a few of us in with a good shot of finishing at the pointy end of the field. Before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit about the New Zealand season, which is up and coming. So we just had Taupo last week, and now we're going to head into a bunch more races. We're going to take you through the season and talk a little bit about the advantages of doing the New Zealand Championships and the up and coming champions we're going to be watching throughout the series. Firstly, the New Zealand Championships very highly competitive. Our tracks are really, really good. We have some of the best tracks in the world, and I believe, in my opinion, that's what's made a lot of our riders top level riders in the world. We've got a huge diversity of tracks, from sand to grass, the pumice in central North Island, clay in Auckland, and then even just clay right down in Timaru, which is different again. And having those different tracks has created the riders that our Kiwis, when they go overseas, they can race a little bit of everything. They're good in the sand, they're good in the hard pack, and they're also good on those grassy turns. So the advantage of doing the New Zealand Championships is it puts you in good stead for travelling overseas, and not only that, it puts the riders from overseas wanting to attend New Zealand in good stead as well. It gives them great competition, nice warm weather to prepare in, which they don't have the advantage of that in Europe right now. But also, our championship is very tough, the level is very high, and we've only ever had 2 riders from outside New Zealand come here and win a championship. The New Zealand format's based over one training where you have to put in a hot lap, and in that hot lap that gives you a grid position for the start, and then it's 3 20-minute motos. Now this bodes well for the Australian riders because they have a similar format, but they do it over 2 races. So they have 1 practice qualifying session and then 2 motos of 30 minutes. So overall the same amount of race time, just over 2 races rather than 3 in New Zealand. And it's very similar in Europe. A lot of their championships is based over 2 races, 2 30-minute races as well. So overall the race day distance is the same, we just split it into 3 races. New Zealand actually does that to help our riders out that are also working. There's only a small percentage of our riders that are professional or looking to be professional. A lot of our field's made up from the 9 to 5 hard-working 40-hour-a-week guy that needs to try and be fit, and we just try to break up those races to help those guys out and make them a little bit more competitive, and also it helps them stay a little bit safer because as your rider gets tired, that's when the mistakes happen. So like I said previously, the professionalism of the championship is very high, and so is the commitment from the manufacturers. So each year, each manufacturer is pushing harder, wants to win championships, and each manufacturer has a different agenda, so to say. From a Yamaha point of view, we're looking to breed champions and have a good platform that they can be part of a great team, do well, win championships, and hopefully head overseas. Kawasaki's recently stepped up with a bigger program. They're also focusing on developing young riders and also have a good coaching structure under their setup with Reese Carter. Honda has Cody Cooper, who's multi-time New Zealand champion and current champion, so they're looking to try and hold on to that number 1 plate, and they also are looking to develop some young riders, and with some of their riders racing over in Australia. And then KTM has Josiah Natzke, who's one of the top kids at the moment, looking to make his way in Australia and be a professional, such as Ben Townley and myself were recently. And on top of that, we also have a whole heap of youngsters coming through in the 125 class, and that's the breeding ground for our championship. And then we have Courtney Duncan on the JCR, Altherm JCR Yamaha team. And Courtney's, I believe, going to be our next world champion, and hopefully that'll be as soon as 2017. So it's a really interesting program for the international riders that are aspiring to go overseas, and then also the Kiwi riders that are looking to stay in New Zealand and be based in New Zealand, because they need to be peaking for that championship and try to win that championship. So they need to be at the top of their game January, February and March. Whereas the rider that's aspiring to go overseas and win a championship overseas, he needs to try to win, of course, because that gives him a good stepping stone up to the European season. But there's no way they can be peaking because it's a long season. So it's really interesting to see the different structures of the riders, the teams, and who's really gunning for the win and who's trying to use it as experience. But the truth is, when the gate drops, they all want to win. It's just a matter of who's put in the extra work and who's really trying to pace themselves for the European season. A rider like Josiah Natzke, for example, he hasn't raced in New Zealand since he's returned back from Europe so far. He's just having a bit of time off, and at that professional sport level, the time off is as important as the hard training, because, you know, like I said, the New Zealand season finishes in March. These guys have got to keep on racing week in, week out. It's a relentless schedule. Ben Townley last year in the World Championships, 20 rounds, 7 rounds overseas, week in, week out, battling traffic, hotels, flights, jet lag, training hard, eating different countries, different food. It's a really tough schedule, so it's interesting to follow the different takes of each rider. I myself try to focus on riders that are going to win the championship here, because that's particularly what we want to do as a team. But then for Courtney, for example, I've been open and honest and to say from the start that her focus is the world title. New Zealand is simply a stepping stone, but I know her and she's going to want to win as soon as the gate drops as well. So talking more about Courtney Duncan, obviously she likes to race in New Zealand, and the advantage and what I believe has made, one of the things which has made Courtney as fast as she is racing against the boys here. Always tried to step up and race those boys and race as many events as she could. As soon as she started having a couple of injuries and not quite as doing as many races, I believe that her speed plateaued. Right now we're back racing the boys as much as we can. Leading into last season, she was able to win in Woodville and be the first female in history to win in the MX2 class. From there, she went on to dominate the World Championships until an unfortunate injury cost her the championship. So there's no way that there would be any change going into this season. She'll be racing the boys as she was last year in the MX2 class. This year, the schedule enables her to do a full season, so she'll be able to do the whole MX2 Championship, Woodville, New Zealand Motocross Grand Prix, also the New Zealand Motocross Championships, all 4 rounds. And between round 2 and 3, she'll be in Indonesia for round 1 of the WMX Championship. But I believe that the racing the boys and being in MX2 is going to enable her to really be at her peak. The challenge of being against the boys is something her competition doesn't get. The French riders and Dutch and Italian riders, they don't get to race the boys as much. They don't get that hard in competition. And I think that's great for her. She thrives on it. She loves it. A lot of people say to us, why risk that injury, or why risk going up against the boys in that situation? But I think as soon as you shy away from something like that, you've got the wrong attitude. You need to really shoot for the stars and try and give it 100%. Be the best you can be, and you're only as good as your competition. You know, if you surround yourself with less speed, you're going to ride slower. And Courtney herself has openly admitted that she always steps up and rides harder and faster with the boys, just because she knows she has to. And that in itself shows why it's so important for her to be racing against the boys. So right now I'm looking after Courtney and her best interests, as well as a bunch of other riders in the Altherm JCR Yamaha team. And you know, a long time ago when I was racing, I never would have thought I'd been in this position. I've been lucky enough to race with some of the best team managers in the world and for some of the best teams, and I always left on good terms, and I feel like I took good things and bad things out of each team, and have been able to try to learn from those experiences and now create a great environment for Courtney Duncan. And it's interesting right now that there's many people doing this. You know, we have Stefan Everts, who's now taken over at Suzuki. We have Ben Townley, who's mentoring riders and working with them here in New Zealand, but also overseas, and a bunch of other riders doing the same thing. You know, as soon as I turn up to the events, a lot of the guys I raced with and banged bars with are rider coaches or team managers or team owners like myself.
I've been lucky, to work with great champions like Roxon and Hurlings, and also with Antonio Carioli. I try, to bring in a lot of my personal experience that I took over the years and winning championships. This managing this team is completely different than what I've done in the past with KTM, and it's you need to not only be a good team manager, but it's also running a company and a business. From other side, new things came towards me, and some points I have to work with people and deal with people and try and bring a good team together. And this is something we're working on very hard at the moment. Working with riders is still my preference, and I think it's where I'm at my best. At the sportive side of running this team. And last year with Paul Jonas, it was a good year. I mean, with Josiah we had a great year, and I had great riders in the past. I was lucky. I was also happy, to have this year and this experience with Ben Townley this year to work together. I know him from the past when we raced GPs together, and it was nice to give him this chance. And it just unfortunately it didn't work out like we all have wanted it. But anyway, the experience we have, and it was good for both of us.
So obviously since myself and Ben Townley, and prior to that the King brothers, there's been a wee bit of a drought in New Zealand, and a lot of people have their opinion on why that is or why that could be. I have my own opinion, but luckily enough, with Courtney stepping up in the WMX class, we also have Josiah Natzke and some other Kiwis starting to break their way into that scene. But Josiah right now has won some races in 2015, won some races in the EMX 125 class, and then in 2016 moved up into the EMX 250F class, which is EMX is a European Motocross Championship, which runs alongside the MX1 and MX2 World Championship. So this year was a huge stepping stone to move from the 125 to the 250F. It was a tough learning road for Josiah. He had Stefan Everts in his corner, as I mentioned previously, in 2015. In 2016, Stefan moved on to a different role and a different manufacturer, and Josiah found things a little bit tough. He had Ben Townley in his corner in 15, and in 2016 he was a little bit on his own. It took him a long time to find his feet, but finally by the end of the season we saw some of his best form. And moving into 2017, Josiah is hoping to try and push for that EMX championship. So that's a wrap for this series of Dirt to Road. We've covered a whole number of topics, all the way from Courtney Duncan, hopefully the new world champion in 2017, moved on to the Reese family from Whakatane, 2 sons and a dad and a mum, which are really passionate about racing, all two-wheeled events, supercross, motocross, but they're, as of recently, focusing more on road racing, doing wonderful things in that sport. From there we moved on to Chris Birch, who I didn't know a lot about, and is an amazing rider that's doing great things in extreme enduro and all over the world, representing New Zealand on many levels. And then from there, we finished up with a wrap of the New Zealand Motocross Championship, which hopefully soon brings a whole bunch of riders into that European scene, and we can again be fighting for World Championship wins. Thanks very much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you again on the next series later down the track.